It's the start of another new week. That means it's time for OneSoccer Today. Adam Jenkins, Oliver Platt, Gareth Wheeler, Alex Gange-Ruzik with you on this Monday morning with plenty to talk about in the world of football in the Americas specifically. We will start with Major League Soccer. We must touch on what happened over the weekend tragically in Liga MX, and then we'll get some ribbing on Gareth Wheeler and the Manchester Derby just to lighten the mood after a very serious topic. But let's start with the Canadian MLS sides. We've assembled a pretty good trio of pundits on this one. We'll start with CFMontreal, who were at the receiving end of another difficult decision for them, going on to lose the match 2-1 against Philadelphia Union, and their amazing blue and yellow kits, might I add. Something about kits on every single show. I want to start here. Is it too early to say that this side is lacking the mental fortitude to really be a contender, if not just pushing for a playoff spot? And I'd like to begin with you, Ollie.
Maybe. I'd like to think not, but it's something that's been a bit of a persistent problem for Montreal, not just in the first 2 weeks of this season, but last season as well. 66% of their goals against came in the second half, right? So it's not new that this team seems to be able to put out a pretty solid effort, a very good effort quite often early on in games, and then seems to crumble. I'm not sure if I think it's a mental thing. I think it's more maybe an experience and more of a tactical thing. I think what I've noticed, at least through these first two games especially, is that when the game starts to change a little bit, the momentum swings or the opposition makes some adjustments, I'm not sure they deal with it very well. And I think it's almost a credit to Wilfred Nancy that the team always starts well, right? They always look like they have a game plan coming out of the blocks that's coherent and that works and that gets them in the game. But when the players are, have to think on their feet a little bit more and don't have the kind of guidance of the coach because they're the ones out there having to, adjust to a game and make things happen and turn things back in their favor, it feels like things kind of fall apart a little bit. So I did think that they were hard done by on Saturday, though, because of that VAR decision. But, I said a week or two ago, I didn't think the Santos Laguna one was that controversial. That one I thought was. That to me was not a clear and obvious error. Carranza, I felt, just kind of jumped into that tackle and made it look like a lot more contact than there actually was. So I think they have reason to feel hard done by there. They could have been sooner up. But yeah, it's becoming a bit of a persistent problem, this.
Gareth, let's talk about the VAR decision, of course, the action of Major League Soccer, but also remembering the fact that they are still in Champions League and trying to navigate that and Major League Soccer. So when you see some of these deficiencies in their mindset or just the way they're finishing matches, are you more forgiving knowing that they still have Champions League on the horizon and on the brain?
Look, it's 2 games into a brand new season. I think I'm going to be forgiving regardless. I like this Montreal team. I think they play within themselves. I think that they lack some top end talent, especially in attacking areas, but they play to their identity, and I absolutely respect that. And they're extraordinarily unlucky not to be up 2-0 in that game, as VAR, a subjective call that I'm not sure why that referee doesn't make that call in the middle of the park. Like, this is what drives me about that call that's played out now twice for CF Montreal. And look, a couple minutes of madness defensively. Camacho has been reliable, maybe 2 mistakes or 2 half mistakes on the 2 goals conceded. It's, the ball's just bouncing around. It kind of happens on carpet, playing a grass field. I think that things are less congested, and the first goal doesn't go in the way that it does. And the second goal, give the Philadelphia Union credit. Like, this is an elite team. This is a top 3 or 4 side in MLS soccer. And it's a wonderful goal. That's how you expose. That's how you break down that 3-4-3 formation. You pull the center back out, you play into the space, and you have willing runners to get into the area to fill the other space. Like, the second goal was very well done. So, look, I'm not changing the way that I feel about Montreal. I'm still very high on this team. It's a tough start to the season. Away in Orlando, at home, inside the Big O against Philadelphia. So, look, I think the best is still to come. This team is still going to grow, still missing some key players as well. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here.
Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I think with Montreal, what we're seeing so far through 4 games, for me, they just need to continue to grow and manage those big moments. I think that's 3 games now where they were, they come out of the gate strong, kind of like Ollie mentioned. They get off to a good start. They look like they're, in control of a game, and then something happens. It kind of gets away from them, and then they end up losing the game. The one game they won, what happened? They came out strong, stuck to their game plan, got an early goal, and just kept the pedal to the metal, so to speak. So I think for Montreal, if I'm looking at what I've seen for them, I want to see them, find a way to, when they're the better team over 60 minutes, like they often have been, make the most of it, win that game. Don't, let it slip away from you. And I think that's just, like we say, comes with experience. It's a young team, they're still adapting to the Wilfred Nancy project. And I think it'll also take some work from Nancy to make sure that in games where they're in control, they're making the most of their opportunities. They're finishing off games where they're in the lead, because as we saw last year, where they looked so good for a good chunk of the season, they still missed out on the playoffs. That's, again, another example of them not managing the moment. And that's going to come with experience. It's going to come with more reps. And because, again, like Garrett says as well, there's so much to be encouraged with the project. You see these young players, you see how well they play. It's just, you got to win games. You got to find a way to grit it out and win those 1-0 games, because as fun as those 3-0 games are against Santos Laguna, at the end of the day, those losses against Philadelphia, where they're down to 10 men, you had them 1-0, even almost 2-0 with the VAR. Those are the games that you're going to look back and be like, oof, that's probably where they missed the playoffs. As wild as it is to say early in the season, these are the kinds of games you need to maybe get a 1 instead of a 0, or a 3 instead of a 1.
If Kyoto plays, I think they win that game. Like Kamara is saying and doing all the right things off the field. He's a true legend in Major League Soccer, but 37 years of age. And that's who you're relying on as your number 9 right now. It's a difficult spot when Kyoto's not playing. So I honestly think if Kyoto plays that game, then Montreal wins it.
Four games on the roads in a row now for them. Like I agree with what the guys are saying. I do think they're a good team. I think they've played the best of the 3 Canadian teams so far this season from what I've seen. But they could dig themselves a hole really easily here if they're not careful. And that's the challenge of the Champions League.
Absolutely. Well, Champions League is where I want to go to next. Gareth, you'll have the call on Wednesday. You had them against Santos Laguna, a very different opponent in the table, in the legacy, the history of the club. And what would you handicap this tie at if you wanted to give Montreal a shot at this? Do you see them as heavy underdogs, fighting chance? How do you view this tie?
Fighting chance, absolutely. Look, Cruz Azul, I mean, you saw them firsthand. You saw a lot of their second team players. One, it depends who they're playing. 2, they're just a difficult team to play against. They're not going to run you off the field. I think that this could be a tie with not a lot of goals, and it's going to be tightly contested. That's just the way that Cruz Azul plays. They try to grind you down. They actually lost to Santos Laguna the match after CFMontreal smashed them 3-0. So, and then they played Tigres to a 2-2 draw since. And look, this game, this away match this week, it sounds like it's going to be played behind closed doors. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but we're going to address Liga MX a little bit later on. All of these MLS teams have a really good chance. I honestly think that if there's ever a year that an MLS team is going to go on and win the Champions League, it's this year. And I fully expect Montreal to be right in the mix. They're a difficult team to play against, Montreal. So I'm not overlooking them or their chances in this tie whatsoever.
Ollie, how do you view Montreal, having watched Cruz Azul and Forge and Montreal and Santos Laguna? Where do you see them fitting in here?
Yeah, it's going to be a different Cruz Azul team, I think, than we saw against Forge, where they did obviously rotate. But I think Montreal has every chance here. I agree with Wheels. I think this has got to be the year for MLS when you look at the strength of the MLS teams, the field that's there with New York and Seattle and New England's, like they're 3 top teams. And then, Montreal, if they can get past Cruz Azul, they'll feel like their biggest test is probably out of the way. I think Cruz Azul probably looks the strongest of the Liga MX teams. So has to happen this year for me. We'll be asking some serious questions, I think, about MLS teams in the Concacaf Champions League if we're not seeing an MLS winner of the competition this season.
Alex, what are your thoughts on the matchup?
I think it comes at a good time for Montreal. As their first 2 weeks in MLS haven't been ideal, but like Gareth mentioned, the Cruz Azul form, even since kind of when the first leg of the Forge game where they were kind of near the top of the Liga MX standings. They've kind of been dropping points since. Obviously, that you can start to see the Champions League wear on them too. It shows that it's not just MLS teams. It can also impact strong, deep Liga MX teams. They tried to really roll their roster through against Forge. So for Montreal, you look at that, you have to be excited. I think you also have to be excited by the fact that you're going there in the first leg. So if you can try to do some good damage control at the Azteca, where it sounds like there's going to be already limited capacity, and there's also, obviously, with the incidents going on, there's been reports that there might be no capacity, which could obviously play massively into Montreal's hands. You never want to go into a crowded Azteca of any sort. So looking at those factors, I think if you're Montreal, you can get something out of this first game, be it a 1-0 loss, a draw, something of the likes. They always do well at the Big O in Champions League nights. It's just, a matter of fact. You look back in their history, they always do well in those games. So if they do well in the Azteca, I back their chances at the Big O 100%.
Yeah, Wednesday is going to be quite the night with the Canadian Championship draw, followed by leg 1 of CFMontreal and Cruz Azul, all available live on OneSoccer. Let's head west, much like Alexander actually did this weekend. Lucky Devil heading to Vancouver. It was a disappointing opener to the season. Vanni Sartini said a lot of really good things. He was sending the messages that he had to get across, and then they performed. It wasn't a win, but it was a result against the MLS Cup champion. So, Alex, you were in the city. What were your thoughts on the tactical changes and a bounce back from the Whitecaps?
Well, from an entertainment standpoint, maybe not the best home opener I've ever been to for the Vancouver Whitecaps, but it was certainly, it was a good game. I think you look at the scope of the team you're playing the defending champions. New York City were very hungry. We kind of talked about it in the lead up to the game. They really wanted this game. They went out with their full strength lineup despite having Champions League responsibilities themselves on the Tuesday, not even the Wednesday or Thursday. Like, they have a Champions League game right around the corner across the country. They came out full tilt. But the Whitecaps dealt with it relatively well. I thought they kept, Tati Castellanos quiet, which is what you want to do. Obviously, you can be a thorn in the side in many ways. I thought they not only kept him quiet on the pitch, but they also kind of got into his head a bit. Otherwise, they battled hard. For me, the one worry is that the offense right now is a huge concern. They have one shot on target through 2 games, which no matter what league you're playing in, that's not going to be good enough. And you do wonder where the goal is going to come from, considering, yes, Brian White isn't playing, but is he going to change that much? The service has to be better. But if they're going to keep defending like that, you have to be, happy with it, because last year there was this talk of them being over-reliant on Max Crepeau. And in this game, they looked so much more solid defensively than they have in a while. And Thomas Hasal looked a lot better. Those are the 2 biggest question marks I've had with this team. They've answered them. Now they just got to find some sort of offense and try to balance that all together. So overall, solid result, lots to improve on. But I think you looked at where they were at a week ago, you certainly would take it.
Oliver, you were pretty vocal in your thoughts on the formation that they attempted in the season opener. Did you like what you saw from Sartini with a slightly different look tactically and some of the points Alex outlined?
It was better. I thought he stabilized things a little bit. It was just a lot more straightforward, right? Like, get Ryan Gold higher up the pitch, have him playing off Lucas Cavallini, a lot more direct, not as much attempt to play out the back and through midfields. And it stabilized them. And I think if they continue to play that way, they will get results. My question is, if they are playing that way, what's the ceiling of this team? How good can they actually be? Because it's not anything that's particularly great to watch. It's not going to create, I think, a ton of chances. Again, one shot on target, as Alex mentioned, is not a big upgrade on what they were able to do in Columbus. So, as I said, I think the changes he made were right for this game, because they just provided a bit of stability and went back to basics. But they're not. It's not a style of football. It's not a way of playing that kind of is going to take this team, I think, that far. And it also doesn't erase what the underlying problem is, which is this team is really poor in possession. They're not good on the ball, right? And that, to me, is something that's still going to need addressing at some point if they're really going to be a team that can go into the playoffs and have a realistic chance. And I think they need a midfielder. When I look at that open young DP slot or TAM slot, however they decide to use it, for me, it has to be a central midfielder, because that area of the pitch, they just really lack quality.
Agreed. It reminded me of the Whitecaps from last year. Just difficult to beat, difficult to play against, but I mean, they rode their luck, didn't they? New York should have had a couple goals in the first half, at least. 29% possession. Like, this is their game model. They're a counter-attacking side with a formation that, doesn't lead to a whole lot of attacking prowess. You're relying on Ryan Gauld kind of playing against the grain. Is that the best way to utilize your best player? I don't think so. Lucas Cavallini, another DP. Do you want him chasing and defending the entire game, or do you want him actually getting chances inside the area? Like, it's very hard for me to criticize Cavallini when he only has 1 or 2 chances a game to take advantage of. You're not using him to his strength either. So just their game model hasn't progressed. It's very much the same. Again, they can be difficult to beat. And I think that they're very well organized in that formation. But I mean, you have to be able to take those limited chances, and they're not quite creating enough or doing enough. And I only think that the way that they play in this style can only take them so far. And for me, that's not far enough.
We'll shift the conversation to the final Canadian MLS side, Toronto FC, and a first half to forget, a Lewis Morgan hat trick on the way to not a great result. 4 first half goals will never set you up for success. And Ollie, you've floated the question around, were we a little bit overconfident or too far forward thinking on where Canadian MLS sides could be? We didn't expect TFC to be great out of the gates, but this is kind of concerning, isn't it?
Yes and no. I think if you didn't expect them to have 1 or 2 days like this that were pretty ugly early on in the season, then you were probably a little bit naive. Like, you just have to look at this team on paper, right? It's not a great team right now, and it's going to take time. So for me, I think, like, I understand what Bob Bradley is trying to do. He's trying to build a team with a view to July and onwards, right? When he hopefully does have, a much stronger squad at his disposal, and he's trying to build a style of play for that squad. But right now, I think he's got a group of players who are struggling to carry out what he's asking them to do. You know, I think the way they're defending right now just doesn't really look viable to me. You know, sending both fullbacks flying forwards, Osorio and Pozuelo, both 2 very attack-minded central midfielders. Like, I don't think Michael Bradley really has the legs anymore to provide the kind of cover that's needed to deal with that. New York saw the Dallas game, obviously, and said, we're going to put 2 strikers up front, pin them against the 2 centre-backs, caused all kinds of problems. So I think that's something that he has to look at, right? Is, again, I understand this wanting to build something for the long term. And, you know, we just talked about Vancouver not having a high enough ceiling. Well, Bradley's trying to build a high ceiling for TFC. But then you also have to be a bit realistic about the players you've got right now and what their capabilities are. And I thought they looked like they were trying to play quite a way beyond them on Saturday.
Well, Garrett, they almost lost Salcedo even on a VAR call that went their way. So that was a positive takeaway.
Lucky boy to stay on the field. I have a couple thoughts on Toronto FC. Let's start off with big picture. When you sign Lorenzo Insigne, that's going to lead to hype, expectation, that the team is ready to win. This team isn't ready to win. And that's the only downside to signing a Lorenzo Insigne now. Because generally you sign that player that can take you over the top when your team is ready. This team isn't ready. Insigne has to know that he's going to be part of a process here. And that's what we're going through. About 3.5 starters from last season are starting for this Toronto FC team right now. To turn like virtually an entire team over with the new head coach, by the way, that takes time. And I think that because there's so many young Canadian players and people like to get behind Canadian players, which is a really good thing. But again, it lifts expectation. And I think that it just needs to reset. The way that this entire offseason is being framed by Toronto FC is positive, question mark here or there. But man, like, this isn't just going to happen overnight. I don't know how many times I can say this on this show and just, you know, risk repeating myself, but it needs to be repeated. This is going to be a process. This is going to take multiple transfer windows to get this right, to continue to clear out players who shouldn't still be at the club, give younger players time to adjust, to grow, as well as bring in other players that kind of fit the game model that they want to play. Bill Manning said something to me 2 weeks ago, and it stuck with me and stayed with me, and it's true. No one has ever won with kids, with all young players in Major League Soccer before. Why would that be different for this Toronto FC team? Just look around Major League Soccer right now. Even like the Austins of the world, like, relatively new sides to this league, they've still gone out and recruited and brought in experienced players in key positions. That's what you need. Players who are in their prime that can get through games, that can deal with anything that's thrown their way. This is all new for Toronto FC's players. And the mistakes we're playing to see. I like their game model. Honestly, I look at the way that they're trying to play. I'm like, yeah, okay, this makes a whole lot of sense. But right now, I just don't think that Bradley is the players who are ready enough to go on and play and win that way.
Alex, I'll give the final word to you on Toronto FC, and also a note, add anything you want, but also let's talk quickly about Caden Chung and Lucas McNaughton also making debuts, and a big move for those two young men in the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, looking at Toronto's first 2 games, there's a lot to be encouraged with. I think the Bob Bradley system, as we saw at LAFC, when everything's clicking, when it's rolling, it's fun. You get the fullbacks flying up the pitch. You got all sorts of interplay in the midfield. It's a fun style of play. And I think right now for Toronto, they have to kind of find, they just kind of they're still working on. I think for me, one thing I see is the difference in the midfield between that LAFC team and that Toronto team. It's kind of like Ollie mentioned, Jonathan Osorio, Alejandro Pozuelo, Michael Bradley. That's a great midfield in possession. We're seeing it when Toronto has the ball. They're controlling the game very well. But for me, I look at that LAFC side. You look at what someone like Edward Atuesta is able to do on both sides of the ball. Can Michael Bradley be that person at this age? Maybe 5 years ago he could be. And I just look at little details like that. It's players just, not quite ready for the role yet. And maybe it will take a different player from Michael Bradley to properly implement this system, or they might have to tweak the system to suit Bradley. Maybe they get a number 6 alongside him, so he doesn't have to do all this sort of defending. But because we see the downfalls of the system in a game like this, where New York was just hitting them on transition. It felt like every time we'd watch, it'd be a 3-minute spell of possession for Toronto, and then it'd go the other way, and it'd almost end up in their net. And that's just not going to be sustainable. And I think that will take, they'll take time, like Gareth mentions, to grow and to ease in the project. And that also might, like Ollie says, some players might need to come in at certain positions. For me, I'm looking, the main one is the number 6, but maybe how we view the fullbacks, how we view the wingers, all that might change as the things go along here.
See, I'm not looking at the number 6. Like, I thought Pozuelo played the role in central midfield very well in the first game against FC Dallas. I mean, you saw the frustration. Salcedo was having to go at him multiple times for not doing some of the running that was required. That really stood out for me. And just in terms of, sentiment amongst the fans, Ollie, you were there. I was a little bit surprised the team being booed off the field at halftime, the boos at the final whistle. That tells me that the people don't really understand the process that needs to be played out here. I think that it took a lot of people in that stadium by surprise. It was a celebratory day going into a stadium without restrictions, Ollie, but I think that maybe it's hit home with some people. Okay, maybe there is a longer process than we were led to believe.
Welcome to Toronto.
Yeah.
Welcome
Seriously.
to Toronto is right. And this is one we wish we had a little bit more time. Maybe we'll save it for Friday, but welcome to Major League Soccer, Charlotte, and a record crowd of nearly 75,000 supporters for their home opener. So tip of the cap to them, and maybe a worthy conversation on a later date when we have a bit more time. The reason why we don't have that time to talk about that feel-good story is we have to talk about a difficult story, and that is the awful and tragic, senseless violence from Liga MX over the weekend between Querétaro and Atlas. And look, with this situation, you can look as much as you want, and some really good reporters are trying their best to get firmed numbers that just aren't available on casualties, loss of life, and injuries. In the grand scheme of things, no matter what those numbers are, it's awful. The violence that broke out mid-match. And look, we haven't seen violence like this in Liga MX in quite some time, but we continue to see issues with the Mexican national team and the Mexican top flight and their supporters, leading to a nasty conversation that's important to have. Ollie, how or what will make this end? Can this end? And what do you believe are some of the necessary steps to try and mitigate more of this in the future?
Well, I think I'm not going to try and pretend to be an expert on this. There's a good piece by John Arnold, who's a journalist who covers Mexican soccer really well, that I'd recommend everyone seeks out and reads, because that goes into some of the kind of deeper problems relating, all the way down to Mexican society, right, and outside of football that have resulted in something like this. But I think obviously, as much as you look at the actions of the supporters and it's disgusting and abhorrent, and obviously it's their actions are their responsibility, but you also have to look at the authorities here and the complacency of the authorities, because like you mentioned, Adam, this isn't really anything new. This is worse than it's been before, obviously. But even between these two teams, there's been persistent problems down the years. There was no actual police I've heard in the stadium. It was just private security who like aren't equipped to deal with this kind of thing. So that's one thing. Like I remember being when I was in Mexico for the Canada game at Azteca, everyone was on high alert because a week before someone had managed to get a gun into the stadium through security. You know, it's just these things kind of are happening in Mexican football and have been happening for a number of years. And it seems like not much has really been done to kind of stop it, to kind of create a more, you know, a safer environment, a more modern kind of environment that we see in the top leagues around the world right now. And that's something that's going to be a big problem for Mexican football, and obviously has become a problem in the biggest possible way this weekend if they don't start to do something about it. So it's a shame that you know, it comes to this, and this has to happen for people to maybe wake up and pay attention to it and be forced into action. But you have to hope that now starts to, you know, is a bit of a wake-up call and something starts to happen, because this is a country that's hosting the World Cup in 4 years' time.
Yeah, Garrett, this is how I want to frame it. Look, there's no comparison to an awful homophobic chant that has no business anywhere near society nor football, but it pales in comparison to people being killed during a football match. So at some point, while there will be no perfect decision, a decision has to be made. Something has to be done to squash this from happening, hopefully ever again, but at least deter supporters, because they almost cheer and laugh when they get their pause during a CONCACAF match for the chant. And then here it's like, it's not fair to punish.
But these are completely different conversations that shouldn't be put together, because fan violence and the way that it's dealt with inside of a stadium is something completely different. Look, I'll go back to it. Like, go across the game, the game across the world. Like, there is away supporters are put in situations where they are protected, as well as they're put in a position to avoid violence. Proper barriers between away supporters and the home supporters. Proper policing of events. Like, I've had concerns about events up here and having private security firms oversee events rather than actually having police in the stadium. When you're watching the scenes of violence, you're like, where are the police? That was the thing that was going through my mind first and foremost. 600 paid security officers who would probably be being paid very poorly, by the way, by their private security firm. You know, it might be a part-time job for some of these people. You want them to break up that? No. Have proper police, have proper stanchions, have proper dividers in between fans. Like, look, like as much as we want to come out and say that everyone should be just nice to one another at football matches, to people around the world and people who, you know, suffer through, you know, parts of their life, and they go out and they take out their anger at events like this, at sporting events. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, just the way that it is, but you need to have the proper contingency plans in place in order to take away any threat of scenes like that happening on the weekend. And they were grossly underprepared, and they didn't act in the right way. And, you know, people have now reportedly lost their lives or suffered incredible pain because of it. And it's embarrassing scenes. And look, like, we keep on talking about MLS coming closer in a relationship with Liga MX. When you see that, like, there's no way that this relationship can move forward unless that's dramatically improved. So business is at stake here. Concacaf is doing a lot of great things in this region right now. Mexico should be one of the crown jewels. You see scenes like this, it's an absolute mess. And I don't think it's indicative of the larger Mexican, you know, footballing consumer or supporter or fan. But that's the takeaway, unfortunately, when you see stuff like that. So it needs to be properly policed first and foremost. Then we can kind of work on all the other systemic things that kind of are bringing the game down to a certain degree. But that doesn't happen with proper policing and proper authorities being able to take control of a situation before it kind of breaks out in that way.
Alex, you've certainly read a lot in social media and the news about the event, and I'm sure you have an opinion or two on some of the proposals you've seen. There's been some supporters, some journalists that go as far as to say Mexico can't host the 2022 or 2026 World Cup. This club should be completely disassembled. The owner should be banned. All of these ideas for sanctions in an attempt to stop it. I'm not trying to paint you as an expert on the situation, but based on what you've read and what you understand of this, what do you think are appropriate actions that could be taken? Because something has to be done.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think there has to be appropriate punishment for what we've seen. I think there's just been a history, seeing incidents like this where there's just been too many on the wrists when there maybe should have been more. I think the fact that like we mentioned with the security, that there was a lack of security for games like this, it kind of shows of kind of how the attitude is for these sorts of things. They kind of just pretend it's not happening. Like, oh, there's not, violence in the country, and the fans, that they're going to do stuff like this. So for me, I think the punishment has to fit the crime, so to speak. I think, to use not to use the homophobic chant as a direct comparison, but I think of where they're trying to stamp it out. The fact that it continues to be slaps on the wrist just is kind of an example of why measures need to be harder on acts like this. So I think if you're Liga MX, you have to talk to the clubs, be it point deductions, relegations. You have to hit them where it hurts, so fans realize, because as much as obviously there's going to be bad apples in each bunch in each country. I'm not going to sit here and paint out and be like there's a hooliganism culture. If you go into that, that culture persists all over the world. But one reality is when hooliganism persists like this, it's because fans, for whatever reason, believe they're giving their team an advantage by doing stuff like this. As stupid as it sounds, that's the mentality they'll have. So for me, I think you need to punish them. You have to obviously you have to get these fans, charged criminally accordingly, but also from a footballing standpoint, punish their club, send their club, relegate their club, you do more than just maybe playing 2-3 games in front of empty fans. You have to dock points. You have to make them realize what you're doing is not just okay, not just not okay from a political, a societal standpoint, but also from, as basic as it is, the footballing standpoint, because that's at the end of the day, everyone wants to go watch sport and enjoy sport. Well, if that's going on, then, the club shouldn't be, sitting here profiting from something like this. They shouldn't be allowed to continue and go as if no one's going on, have a status quo. So for me, I think the status quo has to be challenged. Punishment has to be strict, and it really has to make people realize that this isn't okay, and it's going to be, punished accordingly.
This is a big topic. This is a heavy topic. So Ollie and Gareth, I just wanted to open the floor for one more comment if you guys wanted to add anything.
Just to add really, really quickly, I think part of the problem as well, though, is that, Liga MX can go out and punish the clubs, but it's also their responsibility to a great extent as well, right? It's your league, guys. You're the ones who set the standards in terms of facilities, in terms of security, in terms of, the match day requirements for every club. And I think just, you could see them on when this was happening, tweets are still going out from their official Twitter account about other games that are going on. The other games aren't halted. There's just the odor of complacency around this league when it comes to this kind of thing.
And we've kind of addressed this on previous shows, just about the state of Liga MX right now, where the teams are at, where the league is at. If you're competing, on a wider scale for top players from across the world, like Gignac, Tauvin, there's good players playing in this league as foreign internationals. Would you rather come and play in MLS or Liga MX right now? Look, you're absolutely right. It's their own league. I mean, they could deal with these situations however they want, but for the sake of the fans, the safety of the fans, please ensure that proper safety precautions and proper policing is utilized at these events to avoid catastrophes like we saw on the weekend. That is the very least that they can do.
I've always loved the line from Ted Lasso: football is life. Football shouldn't mean death, though. It can be life, doesn't have to be the other. Let's lighten the mood with one final topic, just to end on a positive note. And Gareth isn't going to enjoy this too much. It's not going to be positive for Gareth, but it's going to be positive for me, which is why I'm already smiling. 4-1 was the result of the Manchester Derby. City over United. Did this decisive victory for you, Gareth, show you that Man City are everything that Manchester United should aspire to be?
What, a fake big club? No. This has nothing to do with Manchester City and everything to do with Manchester United. I'm apathetic. I went to the supporters club. I brought my boy. I had a nice time hanging out with him, watching a game. It was a horrible game and a terrible result, but that's where I am. 8-9 years now of absolute crap. Substandard football, players whinging and whining. They want to move here. There. They don't realize how good they have it playing for a club like Manchester United. It's putting the fun in dysfunctional for people like you. For me, I'm used to it now. I feel like I've been beaten down United are no better than a mid-table club with some players who believe that their stars are actually brighter than they are. I'm hoping that results like this and days like this, bring about some positive change. I doubt it. I'm not expecting anything anymore. But look, I'm not going to, turn my back on my club. I'm a lifelong United supporter, and to fully appreciate the good times when you're back up on top, you need to go through moments like this and experience it. So it's all part of the process for me. It's embarrassing, quite frankly. And what's even more embarrassing is the reporting and the whinging and just everything that happens afterwards. It's just too much. It's beyond. And I've kind of learned to show some self-control and just tune it all out. So that's where I'm at. I'm still going to watch every game. It's going to be painful most times. And that's where I'm at right now, Adam. So you can't hurt me. I feel like I'm immune. I've been vaccinated, triple vaxxed on this one.
I don't know if I'd say it has nothing to do with Manchester City. They're pretty good.
Of course they are. But, this whole Manchester City story, they've actually spent more than Manchester United over recent years, and it's turned into Premier League titles. Still haven't won a Champions League. There's still a club that's owned by a nation state and not like a regular owner. Like, their circumstances are so much different than the vast majority of clubs outside of PSG and Newcastle now. So, I mean, it's not apples to apples here. So I'd take the history of Manchester United over whatever's trying to be created right now at Manchester City. Thank you very much.
Alex, I don't think I've ever asked you who's your club. Do you have a Premier League club? I'm just trying to weigh in where your affinity lies here, if it lays anywhere.
Well, if we're talking Premier League exclusively, I'm unfortunately with Gareth on this one. I've been a Manchester United guy since I was 8. So I got the glory days. I guess that's probably what drew me in. And then I've whinged through the last 8 years or so painfully. Obviously, it's helped because it's really driven up my interest in MLS and other leagues. It's really, just getting stuck in whatever I can to. But yes, looking at Man United, it's there's just a lot of structural issues there. I feel like you look at the money in the club, you look at the players in the club, the coaches that have cycled through. It's hard to say that, it's just they've got to clear house at the top. They've got to, find the right balance on the pitch. For me, there's just too much that's wrong in terms of they'll have a good coach and then the roster is imbalanced, and they'll fix the roster and they'll get rid of the coach. And then that for me kind of all starts at the top. But if we want to talk Man United, I'm sure we could go in this for hours, so I won't whinge too much on that.
Well, we are already 7 minutes.
Hang on. Wait. Does anyone want to talk about MK Dons this weekend?
Yeah, sure. Go for it. Go for it. Here's your microphone.
Away from home against first place Rotherham, went 1-0 down to 10. Went down to 10 men as well.
What league is this?
League One, third division. 1-2-1. 1-2-1 against top of the table with 10 men. No big deal.
Anna didn't play though.
Well, you know what? I'm always welcoming ending on a positive story. So Ollie, I hope you enjoyed.
Ollie's Arsenal side looking good right now.
That is true. We can't forget about that. All right, gentlemen. Well, we are now 8 minutes into added time, so this is where we will say goodbye. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Always appreciate your insight, especially on these Major League Soccer worldwide conversations. Gareth, Ollie, appreciate you as always. We'll be back tomorrow for another episode of OneSoccer Today with Danny Petrillo. Head to onesoccer.ca and at OneSoccer for some news on special guests and some special programming this week. All right, that's it for us today. Thank you. See you soon.